Well, kids, here we are, 2 years in, episode 24. It's been quite a ride. Hopefully we got at least another 2 years in us. But seriously, I just want to say before we get going, thank you all for been listening to us. And here's to at least another 24 episodes. All right, let's go.
Just kick a little something for them cars that be bumping.
Yeah, but we need a beat that they can front to. Oh, that one. Be funky. You know what I'm saying?
Hello, greetings and hi. This is the Head Speaks Podcast, a proud member of the Headcast Network. I am your host, Aaron Moss, also known as Head. Welcome to Head Speaks, where I'll be talking about comics, movies, and basically anything geeky. Well, without further preamble, let's get the show started.
12 o'clock at night with your windows down. Headlights blinking because your battery's drained. Armor roll on your tires and a big gold chain.
As I said at the top of the show, welcome to the 24th episode of Head Speaks. I've been doing this for a full 2 years. It's been 3 years since I saw the Jay and Silent Bob's Groovy cartoon movie and the recording of Jay and Silent Bob Get Old that started me down this road. And here we are, 3 years later, 2 years of my podcast, and well, I've got a total of 4 podcasts now. I've got this one, my Task Force X, and that one going up on my 2-year next month. That's where I talk about John Ostinger's Suicide Squad from the 80s and Paul Kupperberg's Checkmate. I've got my G.I. Joe, a Real American Headcast, where I talk about G.I. Joe, a Real American Hero from the 80s, both the comic and the cartoon, with a couple of podcasting buddies of mine, Ryan Daly, Adam Worth, and Kyle Benning. And then my newest endeavor, the Starman Manhunter Adventure Hour. Who would have thought 2 years ago that I'd have 4 podcasts going? But enough about other podcasts. Let's go ahead and go back to this one. So first up today...
Yo, Joe! We'll fight for freedom wherever there's trouble. G.I. Joe is there. G.I. Joe, American hero.
And the masters of the universe.
Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Heroes in a half shell. Turtle power. Who you gonna call?
Thundercats!
More than meets the eye. Autobots wage their battle to destroy the evil forces of the Decepticons.
Whatever the challenge, they are ready. The Centurions are the visionaries.
I am Dungeon Master, your guide in the realm of Dungeons and Dragons.
And now Geekin' with Head.
Now I know, and knowing is half the battle.
G.I. Joe!
We are going to continue. We're going to conclude my little musical interlude we've been having. But before I get to that, let's do a little something like this.
Yo, Joe! We'll fight for freedom wherever there's trouble. G.I. Joe is there. G.I. Joe, American hero.
And the masters of the universe.
Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Heroes in a half shell. Turtle power. Who you gonna call?
Thundercats!
Transformers. More than meets the eye. Autobots wage their battle to destroy the evil forces of the Decepticons.
Whatever the challenge, they are ready. The Centurions are the visionaries.
I am Dungeon Master, your guide in the realm of Dungeons and Dragons.
And now Geekin' with Head.
Now I know, and knowing is half the battle.
G.I. Joe!
So here we are with part 5, the final part of my musical interlude, or shows from my youth. The first one up's not a TV show. It's from a movie. It's in probably one of my top 5 movies of all time. Part of it from nostalgic factor, part of it because I think it's a damn good movie. But if you're wondering why it's here, go ahead and listen. Yes, that's right. That was Superman, the movie, the theme. What more can I say? It's Superman. It's the original Superman movie from 1977, 1978, somewhere in there. Christopher Reeve, Gene Hackman, Margot Kidder. It's a classic. It's a great movie. It tells a story of a baby being rocketed from the exploding planet of Krypton, landing near a small farm in Kansas where he's taken and raised by this elderly couple. His father passes away right around his 17th, 18th birthday, it looks like. He ends up going on a journey, finding out that he's really from another planet. He emerges as Superman, goes to Metropolis, becomes a reporter, fights the good fight, fights Lex Luthor. It's a great movie. I don't know if I need to go into more detail than this. In fact, the theme song's probably longer than my comments on it. I can go all day about Christopher Reeve. He's the ultimate Superman to me. Margot Kidder made a fine Lois Lane. Gene Hackman did great for the Luthor they're portraying. He wasn't the mad scientist, evil genius. He was in the comics. He was more of a shuckster trying to get to do a land grab. But I enjoyed his portrayal of Luthor. Back to Christopher Reeve's Superman. He is Clark Kent and Superman of that era for me. In fact, to me, when he's thinking about telling Lois who he really is, and he's standing there in the apartment, and he takes his glasses off, and he stands a little straighter, and to me, that's what I use when people complain about the glasses of stupid identity. To me, you can see him actually changing from one person to another. That's why, to me, Christopher Reeves will always be the Superman. I mean, don't get me wrong, I enjoyed the other portrayals of Superman we've seen. I thought Brandon Roth did a fine job with what he was given. I thought Henry Cavill did a really good job with the part he was given. I do have my issues with the Superman of Steel movie and Batman vs. Superman. I'm not going to get that into this point, but Henry Cavill I thought did a fine job at it. He looks the parts. I even enjoyed Dean Cain and Tom Welling. Again, they did a fine job, but to me, Christopher Reeves will always be the Superman. I was saddened when he got crippled. Again, even though the last two Superman movies weren't that great, Superman 3 and Superman 4, I think 4 was better than a lot of people give it credit for. I think 4 gets a lot of unneeded, unwanted backlash from Superman 3, in my opinion. We lost Christopher Reeves as Superman, and when he lost the ability to walk and eventually lost his life. We lost a great hero, a great man. What more can I say? It's Superman, for God's sake. Let's go move on to the next show. Our top show, the number one spot on at least my list of all-time shows and movies, opening credits, theme songs, if you will. Here is number 1.
Wherever there's trouble, G.I. Joe is there. G.I. Joe, G.I. Joe is there. It's G.I. Joe against Cobra, the enemy, fighting to save the day. He never gives up, he's always there, fighting for freedom over land and air. G.I. Joe, G.I. Joe's there.
G.I. Joe is the code name for America's daring, highly trained Special Mission Force. Its purpose, to defend human freedom against Cobra, a ruthless terrorist organization determined to rule the world.
He never gives up, he'll stay till the fight's won. G.I. Joe is there. G.I. Joe, G.I. Joe.
Yes, the top show is G.I. Joe. A real American hero. It may not be the first cartoon I ever saw, but it is number 1 for me. G.I. Joe, that's what I blame for my comic addiction I have today. As I've explained elsewhere, I grew up on superheroes. I grew up on, the Super Friends cartoon, as I've mentioned. The old Nicholas Hammond Spider-Man TV show, the Captain America TV movies. The Incredible Hulk TV show. I grew up on all this, but I read the occasional comic here and there when I find them at a yard sale, but I wasn't a comic collector. But I used to watch the G.I. Joe cartoon in 83 and 84, and then when the show started in 85, I believe it was, I watched the series. I enjoyed it. I loved watching it. And as I've said elsewhere, I've gone to the story before. I'm going to go into it again because that's what I do. I repeat stories. Like I said, I watched the cartoon. I enjoyed it. Like I said, I wasn't buying any comics at the time. And then in 1987, I was at lunch, I forget what it was now, with my mother and I think my stepfather, and I forget who else was there. I know my mom was there. We were in Fresno, California, eating at a little diner next to a Thrifty's. It was like right butting up next to it. You walk out of the restaurant to the side and walk directly into Thrifty's. It was all like the same building. And we got done eating early. Well, I got done eating early. So I wanted to get walking around a little bit. So I walked into Thrifty's, looking around. I walked by the comic rack, and I saw the cover of G.I. Joe 59, I believe it was. It shows the guy in a battle armor suit. It's got the Cobra insignia on it. Behind him, there's a bed with a brown-haired person hooked up to machines, covered in blankets, and it was G.I. Joe, and it said Cobra Commander Reborn. Having been, as I said, a fan of the TV show, by this point, I got looking. I was going to say I didn't buy any of the toys, and again, my memory is really shoddy at that time frame, but looking at yojo.com, which I've mentioned on my G.I. Joe podcast, they've got all the figures listed. Looks like I started collecting the figures probably around 86 or so. So I think I was collecting the figures by this point. But like I said, this Cobra Commander figure hadn't came out yet. So I knew Cobra Commander from the show. I knew, his figure. I knew who Cobra Commander was, but I've never seen this version of Cobra Commander. I didn't know who that person in the bed behind him was. I was enthralled by it. I was like, what the heck? So I had to buy that one. And I think at the time, they may have had the issue before that one also, which was a Dusty issue. Dusty's one of the G.I. Joe members. It's Dusty and I want to say Mainframe. There was a Dusty-centric story. I picked up those and I bought them, read them, enjoyed them. Also, sometime either right before this or right after this, I forget exactly. I want to say it was right before this, which added to this. I bought at it used to be a store called Kmart. It was like a Walmart, Target, whatever, at the time. They would sell comics like in 3-packs of some older comics. And at some point in the late 80s, I picked up a 3-pack which contained issues 51, 53, and 55 of G.I. Joe. And again, this was after I was watching the show because I knew all the characters. And the reason I picked it up was when you bought the comic, it was in a steel plastic bag, and you could see 2 of the comics. The other one was tucked in the middle. Well, the ones on the outside was issue 51 with the, the Dreadnought's Thunderstrike. And the other comic was 55. And this cover was a close-up of Cobra Commander, Destro, and Snake Eyes, their heads. And they were all pulling their masks off. And the issue was entitled on the cover, Unmasking. And I remember buying that one because I'm like, well, they're going to show us their face. Wow, I got to check this one out. You never do see their face in any of the 3. A bit of a disappointment, but that's another story entirely. I'll get to later, maybe. But so I've got that one. I got this one of Cobra Commander in a new costume, which, spoilers, I'm going to spoil the story real quick. The person in the bed is his son, Billy, who, once I started collecting the comic, I find out it's a long-running character. He was injured several years back in the G.I. Joe comic, and Cobra Commander, this was taking place a couple months after the Unmasking issue I'd bought, and Cobra Commander had taken off his Cobra costume, not costume so much, but his uniform, and was in hiding, and he was talking with one of the Crimson Guardsmen of the Fred series, who had built this battle armor for him. And so he'd suited up and became the battle-armored Cobra Commander at this point. And he goes on from there, but I'm not going to talk about that further at this point. For further details, you can check out my podcast, G.I. Joe, Real American Headcast, which I'm going to mention here again in a minute. But if you want to check out this story I'm talking about, you're going to have to hold on for a couple of years because we're not going to get that for a while because we're only on issue 10. But again, another story entirely. Drifting off point, let's get back to what I'm talking about. G.I. Joe. So I picked up that comic. And from there, I wanted to pick up, the ones in between what was on the shelf, which was like 56 and 57, I believe. And while I'm looking, I started picking up the new ones off the stand. I started picking up I want to read these back issues. I started buying some of the back issues. I found G.I. Joe Digest, which reprints like 3 issues or so, 2 or 3 issues per book of the original run. So I bought the first dozen of them to get the first part of the series. As I'm going to comic shops, I'm learning about comic shops. I'm finding a couple comic shops in my area. So I'm going to the comic shops and looking for back issues of G.I. Joe. Also, another series I enjoyed watching was Transformers, which I mentioned previously. Transformers, I didn't read the comic at the time, but as Transformers was ending, they introduced the Headmasters. Well, also around the same time, they had a comic book entitled Transformers Headmasters, which was a 4-issue miniseries. Well, I'm already picking up G.I. Joe. Let's check out this Headmasters comic book. So I picked it up, and it led into the regular Transformers comic. So I started buying that one and getting all the back issues of that one. So I'm going to the comic shop looking for these back issues of these comics. As I'm there, I see some, an issue of Spider-Man. Again, don't remember which ones I picked up first, just recollections I had. I remember I'm at the comic shop, I see an issue of Spider-Man. It's like issue 310, 312, something like that. And I remember because it's, I want to say it's McFarlane artwork, Todd McFarlane's artwork. And it shows Peter and MJ being evicted at Christmas time. There's a Santa Claus out front ringing his bell, and the landlord's kicking him out. Thought that was interesting, so I picked it up and again started backtracking those comics, started buying that one from then on. And one thing led to another. While I'm looking at these comics I'm now buying, I'm looking at other comics next to them. I see Flash, which was the Wally West Flash. I pick up a couple of that book, I look at that. That's interesting, so I buy that one. I see Batman, I'm interested in that. At a 7-Eleven or something, I see a issue of Firestorm. At this late, it's pretty late in the run. It's what's called the Blank Slate era. I've talked about this previously, I believe. But I pick up that one because I remember Firestorm from the Super Friends cartoon. Again, I loved the Super Friends cartoon. I thought Firestorm was an interesting character. I started picking up his book. I loved the book. So one thing led to another. So I'm going to a comic shop in Merced. I'm going to a couple different ones. I'm going to one called... I think it was Coppa Comics, or no, I forget it was Bobby's Comics or Coppa Comics. I started out as Bobby's Comics and cards, and eventually it was 3 guys. There was Bobby, Furtado, and Lonnie owned the place. Bobby and Furtado and Lonnie got into an argument or something. They split off. Bobby went and opened a sports card shop. Furtado went off and opened a second-hand type store, and Lonnie kept the comics and changed the name of the shop to Coppa Comics. And that was my home comic shop for 20 years. And there was another shop right, like a block down from his called, I can't remember the name of that shop now. But it was ran by 2 brothers, Manuel. I think it was called Manuel's. Or was that the brother? Oh, it's been a while. They've been closed for years. But I went down there and I'd pick up back and forth and pick up books at either place. That's where I was at. And eventually I got a hold service at Lonnie's, so I went to Lonnie's all the time. I would go to the other one occasionally. I would shop around in Fresno at eventually Heroes I would go to occasionally. There are Sierra Comics, another comic shop called Wonderland Comics. That funny little story is I'm there looking around. My mom went with me and she was talking to the owner. His name was Wayne. And come to find out, apparently they went to college together, which is a funny little story. But anyways, I think I've drifted way off topic, but as you can see, G.I. Joe, for me, was the gateway drug. If it wasn't for G.I. Joe, I may not be collecting and reading comics today. In fact, my love for G.I. Joe so much, again, as I talked about previously, it's been 3 years ago now, I went to a movie, for a Kevin Smith movie. It was Jay and Silent Bob's Groovy Cartoon Movie. It's an animated movie they did. And after the show, they did a filming of their podcast, Jay and Silent Bob Get Old. And I'd just started listening to podcasts, 6 months, a year before that. I got into listen to podcasts because of their comic book and TV series. But again, that's another story entirely I've gone into before. I'm not going to it again right now, maybe later. But as I've talked about, at the Groovy Cartoon Movie, he said, you have a year. Everyone, I used to tell people to make a movie. Now it's too hard. The thing to do now is do podcasting. Everyone can podcast. There's no one stopping you. There's no restrictions. There's no one tell you no. Go out and it's cheap. Go out, all you got to do is be able to record it, and put it on the internet, and you can do all that for free. So your assignment is from 1 year from today, go out and do a podcast. So I went home and thought about it. Interesting. So I started doing a little podcast. And again, a lot of the story is very familiar to you. You may have heard it 2 years ago when I started this podcast. But I went home and thought about it, and it took me some while, some thinking. I listened to some of the shows I listened to, got thinking about what I like to talk about. And I took this homework seriously, and 11 months later, almost 12 months later, I finally came out with this podcast right here, Head Speaks. And then the next month, I started my second podcast, Task Force X, which I started that one because I listened to the Fire and Water podcast and also to From Crisis to Crisis, a Superman podcast. And I hear, some of the people are writing letters and they're talking about these other podcasts they're doing. And I got to think, I'd like to do a podcast about a comic, but Firestorm, he's one of my two favorites. And Shag's already got a great podcast I'm enjoying. The Atom, I could do The Atom, but he doesn't have, he's got his older series, which I didn't really read much of. I read him in the Justice League. I don't actually have a lot of those comics at this point. I've got his Power of the Atom series. I've got his Sword of the Atom mini-series. And that's really it. He doesn't have a lot of series, so that'd be a short-lived one. I don't know. And I think, and somewhere along the way, I came up with Suicide Squad. So you know what? Let's do Suicide Squad and Checkmate. And then as I'm going along, I got thinking, further down the road. And almost about a year ago, I got thinking, you know what? I did Suicide Squad because I wanted to do a DC comic-related podcast. I'm a big DC guy. But as I was thinking this podcast to do, I overlooked G.I. Joe. So, actually, I guess this was closer to a year and a half, 2 years ago. I got this thinking. So maybe right after. I'm trying to think now. It's been a while. But I looked for a G.I. Joe podcast, and I found there was one, G.I. Joe, I forget the exact name of it now. So I downloaded all the episodes they had of that one, and it started like in 2008, 2009. So I'm listening to those podcasts go along, and I'm noticing it started off like as a monthly podcast, and these guys were more into the action figures. They reviewed the comic, but they were big fans of the action figures, the Action Figure Collector Club and all that. And it was, like I say, it was a monthly podcast, I believe. And as I'm listening to it, I'm looking at the dates on there, I'm noticing, for the first year or two it's monthly, then it goes down to every couple of months, and then it goes to twice a year, and then there was one podcast a year for a while, and then there was nothing for a year or two. And you know what? G.I. Joe, I love the comic, I love the cartoon, I love the toys. It's a shame that there's no good podcast. Now, this one's, kind of went belly up. So, because of my love for G.I. Joe, I started my third podcast, which is G.I. Joe, a Real American Headcast. And for that, I got a couple of guys that I've talked with online. Ryan Daly, who I've been on his podcast. I've done some of mine we've talked with before. And I forget exactly how it came up now. But I'd mentioned to a group that, I'm thinking about doing a G.I. Joe podcast. And that's where now my online buddy, Kyle Benning, said he'd like to talk about G.I. Joe. So I got the two of them together and we started the podcast. After that, we added a fourth guy, Adam Worth. And just recently, we brought another co-host in because Adam, due to my late recording schedules and Adam's hectic family life, his own podcast, his work, he's not going to do as much. So I brought another guy named Kevin Reitzel, I believe his name is pronounced. A guy who, he was a fan of the show. He wrote in. He started his own podcast called The Fandom Podcast. And his first episode on a flashback episode was G.I. Joe. They had me on to talk about it because of my love for G.I. Joe. And from there, I decided, you know what? Adam's not going to be on as much. I like this Kevin guy. He's smart. He likes the cartoon. He likes the toys, the comic. He's a cosplayer. He dresses up a shipwreck. And some other guys, he's posted some pictures of it. So this last episode, episode 10 of G.I. Joe, we had Kevin on there as our new co-host. But I'm noticing I've kind of drifted off point at this point, and I've gone real off topic. But I said all that to say that, that's how much I love G.I. Joe, that not only have I read all the comics, watched all the cartoons, bought a lot of the figures, but I've also started my own podcast on G.I. Joe. All because of that one theme song I played. Oh, Lord, look at the time on here. I've been rambling about 15, 20 minutes on this probably. Anyway, well, that's the way it is. It's G.I. Joe, a real American hero. And that's why I was going with all this before I got sidetracked with my history on it. That's why G.I. Joe is my number one spot, because it started me with my comic book addiction. It's led into more of my podcasting addiction. So basically, I think my wife hates G.I. Joe because of that, just because I got such a love for the comics and podcasting and everything. No, seriously, my wife, she's not quite the geek I am, but she's a fan of the comics, the comic book movies. She doesn't really read the comics, but she likes superheroes. But I think I've drifted off enough point on that. Let's go ahead and get back on topic, and let's finish this up. Number 1, as I've said a couple of times, G.I. Joe, a real American hero. Before we wrap up this segment, I'm going to play one more theme song. This is from G.I. Joe, the movie, which was an animated movie that they came out with. It was supposed to be released in theaters, and Transformers did horribly, so they just released it on video, if I'm not mistaken. Let's go ahead, and before we go out of here, I'm going to play G.I. Joe, the animated movie introduction. Hold tight, kids.
is the code name for America's daring, highly trained Special Mission Force. Its purpose, to defend human freedom against Cobra, a ruthless terrorist organization determined to rule the world.
Fighting for freedom wherever there's trouble over land and sea and air. Retreat! G.I. Joe! G.I. Joe is there! G.I.
Joe! It's a bit lengthy, but I love that intro. That's why I'm using it as my new intro on the G.I. Joe podcast. But I think I've talked enough about G.I. Joe for a non-G.I. Joe related show. So as I said, if you want to hear more about G.I. Joe, definitely check out my podcast, G.I. Joe, a Real American Headcast, or myself, and normally Ryan Daly, and when they can, either Adam Worth, Kyle Benning, and or Kevin Reitzel will join me as we talk about, we're covering the entire G.I. Joe, the comic book series, starting from issue 1. We're going to cover that entire run. We're also going to start when they chronological order. We're going to slide in the Order of Battle books. We're going to do probably going to talk about the G.I. Joe vs. Transformers books. And when Special Mission starts up around issue 51 of the comic, we'll be reviewing that at the same time. And we're also reviewing the G.I. Joe, the cartoon. We started doing that. So, like I say, we're on episode 10, which reviewed issue 10 of the comic, and the third episode of The Revenge of Cobra, which was the second miniseries. We're having a lot of fun doing that. Definitely come check us out over there. But again, that's enough for G.I. Joe. That's enough for the cartoon theme shows from my past. I think I've stretched it out, 5 episodes now? I think I've stretched it out long enough until I come up with a return of it. We're going to go and end right there. Thanks for listening, guys. Hold on. I'm going to play another little brief. I'm going to play some promos from some friends of the show, and we'll be right back with my next segment. Thanks. Head Speaks will be back after these important messages.
Hello everyone, my name is Pat, and I'm the host of a new podcast called The Long Box Crusade. A while back my wife said to me, "Why do you keep buying more comics? I bet you have not even read all the comics you have already." Well, she's right, but let's keep that between you and me. So I took her up on the challenge to read them all. I decided to read my collection of comic books in chronological order by the issue's cover dates. I wanted to relive their adventures and bring back the memories I had of my childhood in the late 70s, 80s, 90s, and beyond. My collection has been stashed away in over 20 plus long boxes in the basement. I'll leave it up to your imagination as to why I cannot have them on display upstairs, but that's a different story. The Long Box Crusade podcast will be of recaps and reviews of the issues in my collection in a fun and friendly way. You can find the podcast at longboxcrusade.com. I hope you will join me on this crusade to read them all.
Here we are, born to be kings with a princess of peace.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kevin of the Fandom Podcast Network. Please join me and my fellow co-host and co-founders, Kyle and Norman, as we bring great podcast programming to you. We have awesome shows like Culture Clash, hosted by Kyle and me, where we talk about all of the geeky and nerdy news, including regular Star Wars updates. We also have the Fandom Flashback shows, where we look back fondly on pop culture fandoms that are near and dear to our hearts, including recently our G.I. Joe Fandom Flashback and our Highlander Fandom Flashback episodes, which include celebrity interviews. We're also proud to announce our new podcast dedicated to Highlander that Norman and I host called Blood of Kings, a Highlander podcast. You can find these great shows on Fandom Podcast Network on iTunes, Stitcher, and Podbean, on Facebook under Fandom Podcast Network, and you can email us at fandompodcastnetwork@gmail.com and find us on Twitter at FanPodNetwork.
And now back to Head Speaks. Real quick comment about the previous 2 promos I played. One was for a fan. Actually, they're both people I met through my G.I. Joe Royal American Headcast show. The last one I played, Kevin's Fandom podcast. He's a fan of G.I. Joe also. He on his Fandom podcast, he was talking about his flashback episode. His first one he had was on G.I. Joe. He had me on there as a guest host. My last episode of G.I. Joe, which I dropped last Thursday, I returned the favor and I had him on. In fact, I will probably have him on as a reoccurring guest on the G.I. Joe show. And the one before that, Pat's Long Box Collection show, Pat wrote into me as a fan of G.I. Joe. He was thinking about starting a G.I. Joe podcast. He found mine, listened to it, loved it. He's asked to be on there. I'm going to try to get him on my show soon. But this is the podcast he started. He's asked my advice. My advice. Pat, if you're listening to this show, a little advice to you. Learn how to speak. I have that problem. But no, I listened to his first episode he's released. It's a great show. He's looking at his comics he owns. And I believe it's in chronological order, from the oldest going to the newest stuff, and rereading it. I definitely recommend both of these shows. Not only these good guys, because they like my G.I. Joe show, but no, they're good guys. They have well-placed thoughts, and they're just great to listen to. So check out both their shows. But enough promoting them. Let's get back to my show. And now for this 24th episode, this 2-year spectacular, I'm bringing back a segment I haven't used in a little while. Again, trying to be a friendlier, gentler, more brotherhead. I'm going to bring it back for this episode.
Bitch and moan, bitch and moan, bitch and gripe, gripe and moan, bitch and gripe, bitch and moan, bitch and moan, bitch and gripe.
Brotherheads, bitches, moans, and gripes.
Hope the title isn't too offensive of the segments. I like that title. Anyways, but I am going to keep this, again, more family-friendly, just because that's the way I am trying to go with this podcast at this point. If it turns out to be a little unfamily-friendly, I will put a tag up. I'm going to try to keep it that way. But let's get on to today's Bitches, Moans, and Gripe. Today, I'm going to complain about fanboys and social media. Yes, me, Brotherhead, the guy that's got 4 podcasts, 3 of them dedicated to comic books, and then this directly, and then this one here, which is mainly about comic books. I'm going to complain about fanboys and social media. The reason I'm complaining, a little backstory is, as you guys know, if you listen to me talk at all, I have a Task Force X podcast where I talk about the Suicide Squad from the 1980s. A great book, great characters. John Ostrander did a great job of writing the characters. He took a bunch of second and third rate characters that no one cared for, and he gave them personality, gave them real lives. He made them someone you want to care for. That was a great run of comics. That's why I've dedicated one of my podcasts I'm doing, the second one I ever started, to his run of comics. I'll also talk about Checkmate, but that's not germane to this point of the story. If you aren't aware, in the next month or two, there's going to be a Suicide Squad movie coming out. And I've been commenting a little bit here and there on my podcast. I talk a little about Facebook and some other Facebook groups I'm on. And I found one entitled Suicide Squad 2016 Unlimited or something like that, where they talk about, it's to be for fans of the movie and for people to chime in on the movie. Well, I joined that because I'm a fan of Suicide Squad. I really want to love the movie. And so I joined over that group. Well, here just the other day in real time, about a week before I'm dropping this episode, I've had to withdraw from that group. I chose to personally remove myself from that group. The reason is not because there wasn't a bunch of jerks, spamming the plane or anything like that. The thing is, that group is, and again, not to talk bad about Facebook groups or other people, but you know what? The heck with it. This is my podcast. I'll do what I want. That group is mainly a bunch of what I would call yes men or yes fanboys. They didn't want anyone on there disparaging the movie in any way. And while, again, I'm a fan of the comic and I want to be a fan of the movie's not out yet. All we can go by is the trailers, the shots they show, the release they give out. That's all we can go by. And so I'm basing all my perceptions on what I know of the comic and what they've shown us. 3 trailers and all these set photos and everything, all the pictures that come out. My main concern, beef, gripe, complaint, whatever you want to call it, with what we've seen so far is that this movie is entitled Suicide Squad. A fan of the Suicide Squad comic, you would think it's going to be around the Suicide Squad. Well, on this group, about 85% of the comments, pictures, stories, what have you, is related to Jared Leto and or the Joker, as he is in the Suicide Squad movie. And I like the Joker as much as the next guy, as long as you're just an average fan. Not like my buddy at work, Gabe, who's, obsessed with the Joker, and a lot of the people on the Suicide Squad page. I like the Joker. Having said that, so far, and I've made this comment elsewhere, it's no surprise, I'm not impressed with what Jared Leto is bringing to the table as a Joker. We'll talk about this for a minute before we move on to the main topic here. Jared Leto, and I think I've talked about this briefly on my Suicide Squad podcast, but Jared Leto, for one, I don't care for the design of the Joker. I do like that it appears he does have the bleached skin and the green hair. I like that. I don't quite know if he's got a rictus And I don't care for the grill he's got. He's got a metal grill, and he's got tattoos all over himself. He's got one that says damaged on his forehead. I think it was damaged. And a few others that's scattered amongst his body that you can see pretty well. To me, as I've said there, I've said elsewhere, that's not the Joker. The Joker doesn't need to tat himself all up. The Joker, I mean, yes, he has cut his face off in recent comics, which I'm not 100% happy with, but the Joker doesn't need to feel the need to tat himself up. And then some people are saying there, well, that's a new gangster, that's the way the Joker does it to impress people. No, stupid. The Joker does not need to impress people. The Joker does what the Joker does because the Joker does what the Joker does. And the Joker does what the Joker likes doing. It's a lot of Jokers. But the Joker's not going to tat himself up to make himself seem more bad. He's going to kill somebody. He's going to do a joke that may make you think he's going to kill somebody that doesn't. But I don't... And again, over my 20, 30 years of reading comics, I don't see that, I guess 30 years, I don't see the Joker being the one to tat himself up. So that really disturbed me. Plus, what I've seen from Jared Leto, the few lines, again, he hasn't delivered a lot. The few lines I've seen him deliver, I just haven't been impressed with. Especially there was one that, I'm not going to kill you, I'm going to hurt you really bad, or something like that. That line does not impress me. I don't know if it's the way it's written, the way Leto's delivering it. And again, he may surprise me and be an excellent Joker. I'm hoping. Because I want a really good Suicide Squad movie. But so far, I'm not impressed with the Joker. Which brings back around to the main point, is that this is a Suicide Squad movie. Most of the promos, most of everything you see coming out of this movie relates to the Joker, who in the comics is not a member of the Suicide Squad. He appeared briefly, I believe, in the later issues. I haven't gotten that far in my recaps of it yet. Spoiler, if you're listening to that podcast, or if you're not familiar with it, in The Killing Joke, the Joker kills Barbara Gordon, which I covered here a couple episodes back on my podcast. Later on, in the Suicide Squad, John Ostrander and Kim Yale will take Barbara Gordon, who is now crippled in a wheelchair, and turn her into the hero called Oracle, who's a computer expert and helps behind the scenes. Well, in the pages of Suicide Squad, John and Kim, they bring the Joker in and they have Barbara confront him to kind of help her get over what happened to her. But other than that, the Joker's not in the Suicide Squad. Here in more recent history, in the New 52, Harley Quinn, who used to be Joker's main squeeze, is a big part of it. But the Joker still doesn't show up much in the comic. And seeing how it deals with Belle Reve, it deals with criminals, I wouldn't mind the Joker showing up a little bit, but as I said, 80 to 85% of what I've seen coming out of the movie involves the Joker, which really bothers me on a fundamental level. Now that having said that and gotten that off my chest again, and I'll probably say it again at some point, I made these comments known because most of the pictures, most of the articles, most of the comments on there is regarding the Joker. So whenever that comes up, I make my usual pithy comment, oh great, the Joker again, or something along those lines, someone who questions why I say that, and I'll go a little more in depth and give them, my feeling on it, because that's what the internet is for us fanboys to express our opinion and our feelings on these movies that are coming out. And so here recently, a week or so ago, someone posted a poll, and and it's what's the most favorite thing that you're looking for in the Suicide Squad movie, or the most favorite character you're looking for to see in the Suicide Squad movie. And this is where my big problem came up at. Out of this poll, I don't know how you responded offhand, I forget offhand, I haven't done the math, but a vast majority of the people that voted in the poll, and again, it wasn't a whole lot of people, so I'm taking this entirely, probably bigger than it needs to be. But on the Suicide Squad group, whose should be fans of the Suicide Squad, I think it was 12 or 16 people said the Joker was the thing they're most looking forward to. Next on the list with I think it was 8 at the time, was Harley Quinn. 4 people said Batman, and then 1 or 2 had made comments on either Deadshot. I voted for Captain Boomerang. There was 1 or 2 on Captain Boomerang, 1 or 2 on scattered around a couple of others. But the fact that a Suicide Squad movie, and the thing that most people were most looking forward to on that poll, is the Joker, Batman, and Harley Quinn just bothers me fundamentally. I can kind of get by Harley Quinn, I guess. I don't care much for this sex bot Harley Quinn. And again, that's coming from me. The guy at my last job, the internet company I worked for, was known as Big Perv. That's saying something, but I can't quite get behind the sex pot Harley. I like the classic Tim Dini Harley, the Harley Quinn costume. But having said that, so the 8 for Harley is okay. But the fact that so many more people was looking forward to the Joker and Batman than anyone else, than Deadshots, Amanda Waller, Croc, Enchantress, who looks phenomenal in there, Captain Boomerang, Slipknot, any of these other characters, just it's wrong with me. And so again, I made my usual pithy comment about, that, oh great, all these people vote for the Joker, and that's what's going to be wrong in this movie. Or so along those lines. And the person who started the poll asked me, why I say that. So again, as usual, I told him, that my thoughts, that I think it's wrong that someone that's not a member of the group, that's hardly been in the comic, and that's who everyone's looking forward to see him. And we had a discussion back and forth about that, and things that came up. He made comments about, that he thinks it's a good idea to have a known person in the movie to drive up box office sales. I made my comment again that yes, you need to have a well-known character in the movie, otherwise no one's going to go see that movie. Because we all know that Big Hero 6 and Guardians of the Galaxy did so poorly at the box office, since they had no recognizable characters in the movie. Even comic geeks don't know much about the Guardians of the Galaxy at the time, or Big Hero 6. And those were big box office draws. They made buku bucks. And like I said there, I've said elsewhere, you don't have to have a big name character to do good. You need to have a good writer, a good director, and some good actors. And you don't even have to have well-known actors, but it could help. But you have to have some good actors that can pull off the acting. You have to have an excellent script and a director that can pull it all together. Along a good score person and some other things will help out, but some excellent marketing. But you don't have to have a well-known character. They didn't have to have Iron Man in Guardians of the Galaxy or Thor. They didn't have to have a cameo in Big Hero 6 other than the gratuitous Stan Lee cameo. Deadpool's another character that no one knew about beforehand. They did have Colossus from the X-Men, but again, Colossus wasn't plastered all over everything before the movie came out. That movie sold on the merits of Deadpool and Ryan Reynolds, who I think made an excellent Deadpool, but that's neither here nor there. So we had this discussion, and this one gal came on and told me, basically to keep my mouth shut if I don't have anything to say about the movie. That all I can do is bad talk, and I hate the movie, so I shouldn't be on that board. And I told her, well, it's not that I hate the movie, because I haven't seen the movie yet. But I love the comic, and I want to love the movie. It's just I see potential problems with it. And as a fan of the comic, someone who's got a podcast dedicated to the comic, someone that wants the movie to do excellent, so we can see a second, a third, and a fourth, and a fifth Suicide Squad movie, because I would really love to see that. I feel it's my job to make my opinions heard. Again, I know it's not going to affect anyone at DC or Warner Brothers. They don't care about this old fat man sitting here in this chair complaining on his microphone or typing messages on Facebook about their movie. But it makes me feel better, knowing at least I'm trying to do my part to try to help a little bit. And she said that, they don't want to hear it, that, it's only for people that like the movie and can only speak positive about the movie. And I'm like, well, unless a administrator tells me to shut up and, to go away, I'm going to keep expressing my opinion, because that's what the internet's made for us fat fanboys at home to sit here and complain to the internet about what we don't like. And someone else came off and said, well, that girl is one of the administrators. So, if one of the administrators told me to knock it off, and all they want is happy-go-lucky people that comment positively on the movie, I don't need to be there. I want to go where, again, I'm not being filtered, not being told, well, you can't say, and I understand, don't cuss, don't, insult people for no reason, things like that. That's just common sense. But don't say nothing bad about the movie until you've seen it is ridiculous. And that's where this last 15 minutes has been about is, me complaining about the movie leads up to this, is that's where I have problems. Some of these people and some of these administrators on some of these groups, they say in fact, not even them, fans of these movies or these properties or whatever it is, they say you cannot say anything bad about a movie based on trailers and directors' comments and actors' comments. Whatever's released to the public, screenshots, you can't say anything bad about it because you can't say anything bad about the movie until you've seen it because you don't know how it's going to play out. But these same exact people take these same exact trailers, comments, photos, or whatever, and they can praise them to high heaven. And that's where I have a problem. Why is it okay for someone to take a trailer let's talk about just one thing, a trailer. Take a trailer and they can praise everything about it up and down till the cows come home, and that's okay. But if you say one negative thing about the trailer, well, you can't, it's just a trailer. You gotta wait till the movie comes out. It goes both ways. If you can use a trailer to say how great the movie's going to be, I can use the same trailer, the same material, say, well, I don't like this particular thing. And I'm not saying that the movie's going to be bad. I'm hoping it's going to be good. For the most part, I've liked what I've seen in the trailers. As me and Ryan's talked about 2 or 3 times so far over on my Task Force X podcast, I'm liking what I'm seeing for the most part. There's just a few as I comment, I'll briefly mention here, I don't care for a Black Dead shot. I'm not 100% sold on Captain Boomerang. At times he looks good, other times not quite so good. And then the whole Joker thing that I've gone about for about 15 minutes now, complaining about. Those are my complaints with the movie, for the most part. Other than that, I'm liking what I'm seeing. They've changed the Huntress quite a bit. I'm okay with that. That looks pretty good. She looks good, what I've seen. Because I understand that the black miniskirt and the green miniskirt and the black top hat witch's hat may not go over so well with the average fan or the average moviegoer. So they got to change her up a little bit. Killer Croc looks good. Diablo, I'm not as familiar with, but he looks all right. Rick Flag looks okay from what I've seen. Harley Quinn, I've got a comment on her. That's just a matter of personal opinion. Personal taste, I guess. But overall, I'm liking what I'm seeing for the movie. The trailers look good. I'm going to be there, hopefully on opening day weekend to see it. Money and time permitting. But I'm liking what I'm seeing for the movie. But there's some things that I've seen that I don't care for. And I refuse to sit aside and say, well, I'm not going to say anything about it. Especially in a group that, wants discussion on the movie, I'm going to say, well, I don't care for these aspects of it. And I don't say, and I've said it in the group, that I enjoy the comic book. I love the comic. I want to love the movie, but until I see the movie, I can't comment whether I like or hate the movie. We're going to have to wait until the movie comes out and I can actually comment on the movie itself. All I can comment on is the trailers, the directors and actors' comments that come out on it, the screenshots, the stills, the set photos that come out. That's all I can comment on. And I'm not going to keep quiet or lie and say, oh, I love the way the Joker looks, when I don't, and the fact that I think there's way too much Joker being promoted for this movie. And like some others said in the group, that Joker's probably only got a 20-minute scene or 40-minute scene, someone said. But again, the way looking at the promo for this, not the promos, but a lot of the teaser stuff that comes out, and on this one Suicide Squad group, for instance, all the comments on there, you would think he's got a bigger role. And part of going back to my problem with the movie and why I'm complaining so much about the Joker, part of my problem with it, I see 2 problems. Or potential problems. One, the Joker's going to be in the movie way too much, which overshadows the Suicide Squad. And the Suicide Squad being a new team, it's not new. I mean, the comic's been around for 30 years, on and off. But it's a new movie. It's new to the general public. You're going to get either way too much of the Joker, which is going to overshadow the Suicide Squad, or B, it's as people say, there's not going to be much of the Joker in the movie, and people are going to go into the movie seeing a lot of the Joker in the promos, people talking about the Joker, seeing all Jared Leto come out, all this stuff about the movie. They're going to think the Joker's going to be in there a lot. They're going to go in and see the movie and be disappointed, and they're going to badmouth the film because, well, I thought the Joker was going to be in there more. Point example, Amazing Spider-Man 2. A lot of people didn't care for it. I loved it. I thought it was a great movie. I'll comment on that later, but I thought it was a great movie. My son didn't care for it as much, and he's a big Spider-Man fan. One thing he didn't care for about, he still liked the movie, but one thing that really bothered him was a lot of the promos, a lot of the talk showed, from what he saw, showed the Rhino. If you saw Amazing Spider-Man, you'll know, or Spider-Man 2, Amazing Spider-Man 2, you'll know the Rhino was only in there for like 5 minutes at the very end. My son was highly disappointed because he thought the Rhino was going to be a bigger part because of what they showed him in the preview. I didn't see these spots highlighting the Rhino, so it didn't bother me as much. And I know that they were originally, my impression, they were setting him up for either the Sinister Six movie or Amazing Spider-Man 3, which isn't going to happen now. But the point is, though, that my son was disappointed with the movie because he saw a lot of these shots with the Rhino, and the Rhino was just a very small part of the movie. That is part of what I think may happen with Suicide Squad. It may get some negative press, may get some negative fan word-of-mouth reaction because, I thought the Joker's going to be in there more. I'm going to be more Joker-centric. Because everything you see coming out for this, and again, I'm not blaming the trailers themselves. The trailer only has a little bit of the Joker. Still too much in my opinion, but that's another story entirely. But all the promos on the social media, back to social media, shows a lot of the Joker. So I think a lot of people are going to be upset when they go in there and see that the Joker's only in there for a short period of time, and they went in thinking it's going to be a Joker-centric movie. Those are two potential problems I'm seeing with so much of the Joker in the movie. Either A, he's going to overshadow the team, the people that it should be centered on, or B, he's hardly going to be in there and people are going to be upset because he's not in there so much. That's my major beef with the Joker in the Suicide Squad movie. But having said that, back to the whole point of this whole conversation that I started 30 minutes ago. And I mentioned this earlier, that's my problem with Facebook and not necessarily just Facebook, but social media and these fanboys, is that you can't complain about something until you see it, but yet you can praise the exact same material up and down, how great it is, how wonderful it is. And to me, that bothers me fundamentally. That's just wrong in my opinion. If they release a trailer, if they release these set photos, they release these interviews of these actors, me as I'm going to be paying money to go see this movie, I feel that if they're releasing this information to me, they want my opinion, want me to express my opinion. They want a feeling from me of some way, whatever it is. If I dislike it, I don't think it's wrong to say so. Now, just go in there and badmouth people and Jared Leto sucks and things like that. You suck if you like this. Things like that's not right. But they go in there and say, well, I don't care for this, and then this is why. Or when someone asks me, this is why I don't care for it, I see nothing wrong with that. Especially when I've never said the movie's going to be bad. I say the movie's I don't think the movie's going to be as good as it could be, or should be, because of all this Joker stuff. But I don't know, long story short, as I said, I dropped out of that group because if one of the administrators doesn't care for you and then they're complaining about the way you talk, to me that says all they want is, fanboys in there saying, oh, how great this is. And that's not me. I mean, if it is great, if you listen to my Suicide or my Task Force X podcast, my Starman Manhunter podcast, or my G.I. Joe podcast, I praise these creators all day long. I have no problem waxing their car, saying what I love about these books. And I say the way about the movies. I love talking good about movies. But on the other hand, if I see something, especially on a movie that I want to love, that I don't care for, I think is wrong, by that same token, I'm going to comment on that. So again, this last half hour is just kind of for me to get this off my chest. But I am curious, what do you guys think about this whole as I said, you can praise a movie, but you can't condemn it by a trailer or about studio releases or whatever. What do you guys think about that? Let me know. Email me at headspeaks.com, or you can go on the Facebook page under the post when I post this, or on the website at head.headspeaks.com, and let me know what you guys think. Do you guys think it's all right? Do you guys think I'm crazy? Do you think I'm making a mountain out of a molehill? Have wasted the last half hour of your life? Let me know what you think. I want to know. And you know what? Whether it's good or bad, let me know. I'm curious. Even if you think I'm an idiot, you think I'm wasting time, I don't know what I'm talking about, feel free to say so. Again, I don't want to filter anybody. I want to hear what people think. But I think that's it for today's Bitches, Bones, and Gripes. Let's go and move on to something happier. I'm going to play another promo or two, and we'll be back with another segment. Head Speaks will be back after these important messages.
Who here likes comic books? Who likes superheroes? Who likes superhero comic books? From the 90s! That's what I thought. Hey there, I'm Nathaniel Wayne from the Council of Geeks, and though I've always loved superheroes, the only time I was buying monthly issues was during the much-maligned 1990s. I've decided to go through my personal collection, issue by issue, and in my own little way, try to answer the question, were 90s comics really that bad? Chances are the answer will be yes, but I think these books deserve another chance, and they're going to get it on 90s Comics Retrial, part of the Council of Geeks podcast, available on iTunes and at 90scomicsretrial.wordpress.com.
A secret governmental organization operating behind the scenes. Task Force X.
Task Force X is an off-the-books government strike team made up of convicts with no hope for release, serving as expendable agents for impossible missions. Succeed, and I'll shave time off your sentences.
If we don't.
You'll be dead. Any other stupid questions?
The Suicide Squad, ran by Amanda Waller.
I'm Amanda Waller. I'm here to indoctrinate you convicts into our special forces.
And there's Checkmate, ran by Harry Stein. This is the tales of DC Comics, Suicide Squad, and Checkmate. Mostly monthly from Headspeaks. Available on iTunes under Task Force X and under Headcasts over at headspeaks.com. We can also be found on Facebook and Google Plus under Task Force X. Task Force X. Check it out, or you'll answer to the wall.
Nobody screws the wall!
And now back to Head Speaks. On today, at the Movies of Head, we're going to talk about the comic book TV shows and my thoughts about them. We have briefly talked about them in the past when the seasons first started. I watched most of the shows, and I'll get into that here in a minute. And so it's just my thoughts on the TV comic book shows for this past season. First off, before I get started, let me say this, that no matter my thoughts and no matter what I say over the next little bit, over the segments, this is a great time to be a geek. I don't think we've ever had this many comic book shows, this many movies coming out at one time than we have now. Even if they're bad, it's good we have so many of them. So I just want to say that, I'm not saying that I wish we didn't have them so many, or you burn out on them. I've heard people say, to heck with you. It's a great time to be a geek, and it's the golden age of geekdom as far as I'm concerned. Now, having said that, let's go ahead and get into my particular thoughts on this past season. What I'm going to do is go through the list of shows as I can remember them offhand. I made a list offhand. I wrote them all down. And these are from the ones that I think are the best, down through the ones that I'm maybe not quite as fond of, if you will. So we're going to start off with what I think is one of the best two shows on TV today. And when I say TV, I'm talking about TV and Netflix. And we'll get that here in just a minute. But one of the best two shows, in my opinion, again, it's a toss-up on which one's actually the best. I think they're both, the first two are the best overall, but for different reasons. The first one is The Flash. This is on CW. It comes on Tuesday nights at, I believe it's 8 o'clock. I DVR it and I watch them all later. So I believe it's 8 o'clock on Tuesday nights on CW. The Flash is based on DC Comics' The Flash, who's been a superhero since the 40s, I believe it was. Maybe earlier. The original Golden Age Flash. The Flash that they're starting the show on, Barry Allen, came out in the early 60s. In fact, or maybe it was the late 50s, 59 or 60, I forget right offhand. This Flash, the Barry Allen Flash, was, most people consider the introduction to the Silver Age of comics. You have the Golden Age, which was the original heroes, and then they kind of went away for a little bit. And then in the late 50s, early 60s, you had a resurgence of comic book heroes. And The Flash, Barry Allen started it off. In the comics, he's a forensic scientist who one day was working in his lab. Lightning struck through his window, hit him, knocked him into some chemicals. Or actually, I guess it knocked him into some chemicals behind him. Splashed him with the lightning and the chemicals, and it gave him super speed. He went on to become the Flash based on comic books he used to read of his hero, the Flash, which we in the real world knows as the Golden Age Flash, Jay Garrick. Originally in the Flash comic books, Barry Allen, as a kid, read Jay Garrick Flash comics, and that's who he based his Flash identity on. There's more to it, but I'm not going to get into the whole comic book Flash right now. But again, he joined the original member of the Justice League of America. He's been a member on and off ever since. The Flash Barry Allen version died back in 1985 during what's called the Crisis on Infinite Earths, back when DC Comics was trying to clean up its universe a little bit and tighten things up a little more. The Flash died saving the world, the multiverse, the universes. He died saving everybody. After that, his protege, Wally West, who was Kid Flash, took on the identity of the Flash. And that's the first Flash I bought off the shelf. When I got going into comics, I picked up the last 2-3 years of the Flash with Barry Allen, which was the Trial of the Flash. I think I talked about that in a previous Headspace, if I'm not mistaken. If not, I'll talk about it again later. But I picked up the last couple years of his series in back issue format. But Wally West was the first Flash I bought off the shelf. I've always loved Wally West, but to me, Barry Allen was something special. I don't know. Even though I didn't buy him off the shelf new, he was dead by the time I got into comics. Barry Allen is my Flash. Having said that, let's get back to the show. TV CW's Flash. This show starts off In the past, a young boy named Barry Allen, he's in bed one night, he hears some funny stuff going on, the water's fish tanks rising up, he gets up, goes downstairs, and he sees this yellow blur encircling his mother. And his mother's being killed, she yells at him to run, and next thing Barry knows, he's halfway down the block, or 2 blocks away, or whatever. He comes running back home, and his mother's dead, his father's being arrested for murder. He goes to live with his dad's best friend, Joe West, who's with the Central City Police Department, and Joe's young daughter, Iris West. And he grows up, he becomes a member of the CSI on the Central City Police Department, investigating crimes. And he's also, in his spare time, investigating his mother's death. Because being there, he knows his father did not kill his mother. He saw the yellow blur, and inside this blur that was killing his mother, he saw the shape of a man. So he knows that some sort of man who was a yellow blur killed his mother. So he's been trying to find out what really happened. One night, while working, he went to a park. Let's go back one step. Again, he's a big geek. He went to this particle accelerator. He left early because someone was stealing his friend Iris's laptop. Long story short, he goes back to the lab. At the lab, he's working. He's got chemicals on the shelf. It's a rainy, stormy night. At this time, the accelerator gets started up. The particle accelerator he went to watch earlier gets started up, and something happens, and it explodes, releasing energy across the city. It messes the storm clouds, and a bolt of lightning crashes through the window, hits Barry, knocks into a bunch of chemicals on the wall behind him. Very much like the Silver Age introduction. They've added the whole particle accelerator, and they do that to kind of link all the meta-humans that they're going to call them together as having a simple origin. Which I don't mind. Again, I like keeping things as much like the comics as possible, but I thought that was a nice touch. So this particle accelerator explodes, and it causes lightning, which hits Barry, which knocks him out and puts him in a coma for 9 months. He's taken to the hospital. They can't know what's going on. Every so often his heart stops and starts back up. Harrison Wells, the man at Star Labs who created the particle accelerator, volunteered to take Barry to Star Labs to see what's going on, see if they can help him. Fast forward 9 months later, Barry wakes up, good as new, and we find out that every time that his heart stopped, actually it wasn't his heart wasn't stopping, it was just moving so fast that these machines couldn't detect it. Long story short, Barry discovers he has super speed. He works with Harrison Wells and a couple of Wells' assistants, Caitlin Snow and Cisco Ramon, both were at Star Labs. And he ends up donating a costume created by Cisco, and he becomes a superhero known as the Flash. Again, a lot of changes from the original story at this point. I mean, in the comic, he gets hit by lightning, he wakes up right away. He finds out on his own he has super speed. He wasn't hospitalized for 9 months. They didn't have Wells, Cisco, or Caitlin Snow in the story. Just as a little side note, Wells was made up for the show. Caitlin Snow is actually from one of my favorite characters' comic books. She's a more recent interpretation of one of his villains, Killer Frost. The most recent interpretation of Killer Frost is known as Caitlin Snow, so that's where they got that name from. And Cisco Ramon is a take on an old Justice League. I say an old. He came from the late 80s version of the Justice League of America, often known as the Detroit League. A superhero known as Vibe. In there was a character, Ramon. First name wasn't Cisco. It was Francisco, or was it Pablo? I forget now. But a superhero named Vibe, who had the powers to vibrate. In the 80s, He was a Hispanic kid, a break dancer, very stereotypical. But this Cisco Ramon is a scientist working for Star Labs. Very much a geek, very much, a fanboy, if you will. So the three of them work with Barry Allen to make him become the Flash. Also along the way, they landed on Barry's adopted father, Joe West, who I'm not familiar with West from the comic book, Iris's father, and that's I'm going to get to that here in just a minute. In the comic, the Wests are white. In the show, he's black. We'll get to that. I'll touch on that a bit more here in a minute. But so Barry Allen has become the Flash, and he's running around. And the first season ends with him trying to stop all the metahumans who were created from the experiments. And a lot of the villains, they were either Flash villains or they co-opted a lot of Firestorm villains for the show, which makes me happy as being a Firestorm fan. Also, on the first season of The Flash, they had Firestorm show up. They created Firestorm. In the comics, Firestorm is a young teenager named Ronnie Raymond with a scientist, professor named Professor Stein. They merge to become Firestorm. In the show, it's a young man named Ronnie Raymond who was dating Caitlin Snow, engaged to her actually. And he worked at Star Labs as an engineer. And he merged with Professor Stein, who had some sort of Firestorm protocols or something like that he was bringing to Star Labs. The accelerator exploded. They thought Ronnie died, and midway through the season, he shows back up as Firestorm. And then the first season deals with Barry tackling all the new hero villains, and also he looks into the death of his mother, and he finds the person who kills her, who turns out to be the Reverse Flash. At the end of the season, he's able to go back in time, and he finds himself in the closet in his house, and he sees a future version of himself fighting the Reverse Flash around his mother, and he's going to go out and try to save his mother, but the older Flash kind of tells him not to, so Barry returns home. At this point, we also see that Barry, the older Flash, saves the younger Barry Allen, and that's why Barry wound up down the block, because the older Flash was fighting Reverse Flash, stopped and saved him, and got back, and it wasn't time to save his mother. I'm just making much to say without giving away spoilers. You know what? We're on the end of season 2. This is the first season. If you haven't seen it yet, sorry, go out and watch it. There's going to be more spoilers from this point on. So we find out that the Reverse Flash, after he killed Barry's mother, he wasn't able to kill Barry what he originally intended. He gets away from there and he finds out he's stuck in the past. So during the season, we find out that he actually, this guy named Eobard Thawne, who is the Reverse Flash, finds Harrison Wells. This was like 15 years in the past. And he kills Wells and his wife, and he uses some sort of device to take Wells' identity. And he becomes Harrison Wells. And this is the man that's been helping Barry Allen this entire season. Back to present time. Well, again, this is then season 1 present time. Barry comes out of the portal, and he made the time portal. He got Eobard Thawne, a.k.a. Harrison Wells, to help him make the portal. And he promised, he said, well, because Eobard Thawne, his whole thing is he wants to get back home to the future. So he tells Barry he'll help him out. He gets home, go to his future. Barry goes back and saves his mom. Barry goes back to the past, doesn't save his mom. He comes back and he stops Eobard Thawne, from taking off in a time sphere they made to go back to the future. This upsets Eobard, and as Eobard gets ready to kill Barry, Eobard's ancestor, who is a big character in this season, named Eddie Thawne, who was dating Iris West, Barry's friend and the comic's love interest. He sees what's going on. He's there. He's found out that Barry is the Flash by this point. He finds out that Eobard Thawne is his descendant, and he's the one causing all this problem. He's killing people. So Eddie takes a gun and shoots himself. Killing himself erases Eobard Thawne from the current timeline. This season ends, and we find out as they try to close the time rift, it opens a rift and to another world, which we find out the next season is called Earth 2. Also during season 2, the beginning, we find out that Firestorm, Ronnie Raymond, sacrifices himself to try to close the portal, and he dies. And the second season is basically spent with Barry and company trying to close all these different portals that were open because of their rupture of the time stream and all that. And across from Earth 2 comes a hero. Again, these would be spoilers for season 2. If you haven't seen the entire season, you may want to skip ahead a little bit. Out of the time portal comes a hero calling himself Flash, who says his name's Jay Garrick. He says he's from Earth 2. He's a hero fighting a guy called Zoom. So Barry spends the rest of the season fighting off Zoom, who is that Earth speedster, with the help of his usual crew, plus he has the Golden Age Flash, Jay Garrick, helping him. And Zoom is trying to kill all speedsters, take their power, and become the fastest man through all creation, if you will. Long story short, we get to the end of the season, and again, some more spoilers. We find out that the man that's been masquerading, I'm going to say now, as Jay Garrick is actually Zoom, Hunter Solomon. He's been acting like Barry's friend, trying to get close to him. And we find out that the real Jay Garrick on Earth 2 is actually, let me get this right, it's Jay Garrick on Earth 2. On our Earth is Henry Allen, Barry's dad. Which I forgot to say at the end of season 1. Sorry about that. At the end of season 1, Eobard Thawne, a.k.a. Harrison Wells, had left a note for Barry, basically admitting to the murder of Barry's mother. So Barry was able to use that to get his father out of jail. And the reason I forgot to mention this, because the entire season, Barry's dad was in jail. When he gets out of jail, he's like, oh, thanks for saving me. I'm going to go away for a while. And so he takes off, and he shows up every once in a while on the show. I'm going to make some more comments about this here in a minute. So anyways, at the end of season 2, we find out that the Earth 2 Jay Garrick is the same man that looks just like Henry Allen, Barry's dad, which was a nice touch. And I'll get to that more in a minute. A lot of that gets more in a minute stuff. But anyways. And that brings us to the end of season 2. I'm eagerly waiting season 3 to see what happens. But let's make some more comments on The Flash now. As I said, I really love the show. It's one of my favorite shows of all time. Even though the guy playing Barry Allen's not a blonde like he is in the comics, and I'm usually a real stickler for a character looking like he looks in the comic. By the end of this season 2, costume looks a lot more like the comic book, and I don't know, this kid just has personality. His name's Grant Gustin, who I guess is from Glee and some other stuff. He's got a personality about him. I really love him as Barry Allen in The Flash. I think he's doing a great job. I think the guy playing Cisco Ramon's doing a great job. I love Harrison Wells in here. Iris West. Let's comment on her real quick. As I said, in the comics, she ends up marrying Barry. Also, she's a white character in the comics. In the show, she's black, along with her dad. I made comments elsewhere, and I'll make them again, that I'm not a fan of race changing the race of any character for any reason. This doesn't bother me a whole lot, mainly because Candace Cameron, I believe, or Candace, whatever, the guy that plays Iris, is smoking hot. That helps on a smell chauvinist pig. And also the guy that plays her dad, Joe West. I forget his real name, but he used to play on Law and Order as a cop. He's playing a cop here. He does a great job. I love his action with Barry. So this is one of the few times I can kind of overlook the race thing. I would prefer if they were both white, like in the comic. That's who I am. Also, this last season, they've introduced Iris's brother, Wally West, who in the comics, Wally West is actually Iris's niece, and he becomes a Flash later on. Kid Flash, who I mentioned later on, becomes Flash. Again, the comics, he's a young, white, red-headed kid. In the show, he's a black kid. In the comics, it's Iris's nephew. In the TV show, it's her brother. The long story there. Apparently, they thought Iris's mom was dead. She actually left town. And while she was away, she gave birth to Wally West, apparently. Wally's showing back up later when his mom was dying. You need to watch the show for more information. I'm not going to get into any more than that. But, again, so I said I don't mind Iris being black because Candace, Patton, I think's her name, is so hot. And Joe West, the guy who's playing him, is doing such a good job. I don't like, again, this kid so far as Wally West hasn't really done anything to endear himself to me. I would rather him be the white, red-headed Wally West that I'm familiar with, because to me, I don't know, I've got problems with it. And part of it seems from the fact that in the comics, they changed Wally West to a young black kid also. Iris is still white. In the comics, it's still her nephew. And, he showed up, and he's a young black kid. I don't know. I've got a big problem with that, and it translates to the character on the show for me because part of the problem is that, for the last 20 years, Wally West has been the Flash. They had, back in 2011, they had their Flashpoint, which recreated the universe, had the New 52, and after that, Wally West was unheard of. A lot of Wally West fans were clamoring, we want Wally back. And DC's like, well, here's Wally West. And they bring in this black kid. To me, everyone says, well, it's just the skin color. To me, it's not just skin color. If that was the fact, you wouldn't have all these racists, you wouldn't have all these, Black Lives Matter thing, it wouldn't be a thing. But in reality, your skin tone makes you part of who you are. It can alter your childhood if you're black or if you're white, where you grew up at. It's all makes you who you are. So to me, changing Wally's skin tone is doing more. And I don't know. It's not Wally West to me. Now they've got the what are they calling it now? The Rebirth line coming out, and apparently they've still got the black Wally West, and they're going to have the the white redhead Wally West coming back at some point. I haven't read how they're doing it yet, but that's for another podcast. This time we're talking about the Flash TV show. So like I say, it's the Flash. Awesome graphics, awesome writing. Everything looks very good. It's got some problems here and there, like I mentioned. Another problem I've got is with my favorite character that's on the show, or favorite character of all who shows up on here, is Firestorm. I thought Robbie Amell, who played Ronnie Raymond, did a good job with what he had. My problem is that in the comics, Ronnie Raymond was a young jock, wasn't all that smart. And that's part of when he became Firestorm, he was the body. Professor Stein became kind of the brain, the conscience, if you will, giving directions and guidance from behind the scenes. In the show, he's an engineer. And at first I tried to tell myself, well, he's an engineer. He's maybe not much more than a glorified janitor. Glorified fix-it guy. But in the show, he comes across as rather smart, which kind of breaks up that dynamic of the young, hothead jock with the older, calmer, intelligent type. Now they're both more intelligent people, and I don't know, it just loses a little bit of dynamics. Plus, in the comics, Firestorm's main ability is transmutation. He can turn one thing into another thing. In the TV show, when he showed up in The Flash, he didn't have that ability. All he had were fire powers. He could fly. And again, later on, he would get some sort of fire powers. He'd always be able to fly, so I was okay with that. But I wanted him to have the transmutation power. I understand that gives him a godlike ability, if you will, and it makes it hard for writers to write sometimes, but that's who the character is. As far as Firestorm's costume, it's not like the comic, but it's pretty good. In the comics, he's got a red with yellow puffy sleeves. His hair's on fire. In the show, he usually wears like a brown jacket. And on his chest, he's got like a, I think it's almost like an atomic net or something like that with some rings coming off of it. They kind of duplicated that for the show, which is really good. And another thing I really like in the show, they've got, when he's Firestorm, it says flaming. I didn't know if they were going to do that. They did. I'm impressed by that. So overall, I like Firestorm in the show. He could be better, but that's the way it is. We'll touch more on Firestorm later on when I get to another show. But that's all I'm going to say about The Flash right now, because I've got a couple more shows to go through, and I've been talking for quite a while. But The Flash is one of my two favorite shows on TV at the moment. The next we're going to move on to is Daredevil over on Netflix. Daredevil is based on a Marvel comic book character of the same name. There was a movie back in the early 2000s starring Ben Affleck as Daredevil. I thought that movie had a lot of issues. This TV show, on the other hand, doesn't have those issues. I forget the guy's name. His name's Charlie something or another, plays Daredevil. I think he's doing a great job. Karen Page, Foggy Nelson, all the supporting characters from the comic are in the show. I think they're all doing a great job. Real quick, Daredevil in the comic and the TV show, he's a blind lawyer. As a kid, his dad was a boxer. He tried to save some guy from some chemicals that were being fell off a truck. He got splashed in the eyes. He got blinded. That also enhanced all of his other senses. He could read regular writing with his fingertips. Great sense of smell, taste, everything. I mean, his other senses were enhanced to a supernatural level. And he also has like a radar sense, so he can kind of see what's around him. Trying to live up to his dad's expectations, who was killed by, I believe he was killed by the Kingpin in both the show and the comics, if I'm not mistaken. He eventually does a red costume and calls himself Daredevil and fights crime in New York on the back alleys. Again, the show and the comic they're very much similar. I think the guy that plays Matt Murdock does a great job, as I said earlier. I forget his name now, but he was from Law and Order Criminal Intent, I believe, as one of the lawyers. He plays Kingpin. He does a magnificent job at Kingpin. Having said all that, I haven't seen Season 2 yet. Season 2, they've introduced Elektra and Punisher. And from what I've heard from a buddy at work that watches it and all my friends on Facebook that are into it, it's phenomenal this Season 2. So it's just a matter of, I plan on watching it. It's just my middle son, who's 22, he loves watching it with me. And it's a matter of trying to find time when we're both together to watch it. And my 8-year-old daughter's not in the room because it's not kid-friendly. And like I said, this is my other second favorite show. And it's a tie between this and Flash. These are two different shows. The Flash is a family show. I can sit with my daughter and watch that one. Daredevil, not so much. A lot more violence, a lot more language. It's a very mature show. But again, Daredevil, the acting, the special effects, the fighting is all magnificent. And again, it's in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Avengers movies and all that, with a wink and a nod. They don't have anyone from the movie showing up in it. But in the first episode, they talked about the incident in New York, which is referring to Avengers 1, the original Avengers movie. So I like that they tied it into the Marvel Cinematic Universe, without relying too much on it. So I thought that was a nice touch. Again, I'm waiting to find time to watch Season 2. I'm chomping at the bit to watch it, because Everything I've seen so far looks really good, and I've loved the first season. Moving on from there, we're going to move on to my third favorite show, or second, since the first two are tied, The Walking Dead. This is based on an IDW comic book of the same name, and basically it tells the story of the zombie apocalypse. I've read most of the comic book series after the fact. I've watched the show, and basically the show and the comic follows a guy named Rick as he's trying to survive in the zombie apocalypse. It starts off the show, he's shot, he's hospitalized. Beforehand, he wakes up after the zombie apocalypse has happened. He's alone in the hospital. Eventually, he hooks back up with his wife and his son Carl. And it just follows these guys as they try to make it through the zombie apocalypse. And it's been 5 seasons, I think, of the TV show. And just whenever you think things are going to start going good for them, all hell breaks loose. This one here, again, great writing. The special effects on it, the zombies, are just totally magnificent. If you haven't seen this, I definitely recommend checking out The Walking Dead. It's a great show. And like I say, not much really to say about it. It's just a zombie apocalypse show, but it's done very, very well. Again, quickly moving on to the next show, Constantine. This was on NBC. It was only 1 season. Actually, not even that. It was like 13 episodes, and they canceled it because NBC's retarded. I thought Constantine, while not quite as good as the comic book, it was very good. The Constantine comic book, for the most part, is a Vertigo title from DC Comics, and it follows the adventures of a man named John Constantine, or Constantine. I may be mispronouncing that, depends on the mood I'm in. And he's a bit of a and he plays with the dark arts. He makes deals with demons. He's a real ass. About a decade past, there was a Constantine movie. It was called Constantine. And it starred Keanu Reeves. The movie itself was okay, but as far as the Constantine character, I think they totally missed the mark. In the comics, he's a British guy. In the show, Keanu Reeves, he's a white, almost surfer guy. That's who Keanu Reeves always comes across as to me. Again, if the movie hadn't been called Constantine, if it hadn't been based on the comic book, it would have been a decent movie. But seeing how and I read the storyline it's based on, they totally mangled it, in my opinion. So I'm not a huge fan of that movie. On the other hand, the TV show, once again, much like Daredevil, magnificent. Not quite as dark, and I don't know, it doesn't quite ring up to the Vertigo title, but then again, it's on NBC, so they couldn't really get away with quite as much. But I thought with what they did an excellent job. Unfortunately, they canceled it, though we did appear in an episode of CW's Arrow. So maybe CW will pick that up at some point. Here's hoping. But I really enjoyed Constantine, and I thought it was a good show, and I'm sorry to see it go. Moving on to the next show, Supergirl. Supergirl, if you don't know who this is, you're an idiot. This is based on DC Comics of the same name. This is Superman's cousin, Kara Zor-El. Overall, I really enjoyed the show. There's I've got a lot of qualms with. I've mentioned previously. I'm going to mention it again right now. But before I get to the qualms, I'm going to say I enjoy the show. And the major thing for me is my 8-year-old daughter loves this show. So the fact that my daughter loves it, and it helps. Again, she's already into comics because I am, and she's my mini-me. But the fact that this helps brings her in so much more, and she really loves this show. This brings us up a couple of notches and kind of helps me ignore the problems I have with it. Again, overall, they're very much similar as far as tone. Both the show and the comic focus on a young girl named Kara Zor-El who was rocketed from the home planet Krypton before it exploded. Something happened. Her ship got delayed. It varies from the comic to the show. She shows up on Earth as a teenager still, while her cousin Kal-El is an adult. Kal-El places her with a foster family, in this case it's the Danvers, so she can have a normal life. In the show, she grows up and works for a media company in National City where she lives here, working for Cat Grant at a company called Catco. And she becomes Supergirl and basically helps fight off alien menaces. In the show, she works as Supergirl, she works with the DEO, who's also an organization from the comics. In the show, her sister works there, and that's who got her hooked up with him. Also in the show, at the DEO, works a guy named Hank Henshaw. And this is another one of my little qualms. In the comics, Hank Henshaw is a white guy. Him and his family are scientists. They're in space. While Superman's off doing some stuff, a device he had called the Eradicator gets thrown into the sun. It causes some solar flares or something that causes his family to mutate. It's kind of a parody of the Fantastic Four, if you will. The rest of his family dies, and friends die that was in the craft with him. And Henshaw finds himself merging with computers, and he can transform himself into different computers. Eventually, in the comics, he finds some sort of Clark's, I guess, DNA, grows himself a Kryptonian, half Kryptonian body, half robotic, comes to Earth after Superman dies, claims to be Superman reinvented, if you will. And later on, we find out the truth about him, and he becomes Cyborg Superman. In the show, he's a black guy. Again, the whole race changing thing I mentioned earlier, I've got problems with that. But again, more spoilers are coming up, and I'll get that in just a minute. Let's go forward now. Another nice touch of the show. Again, the spoilers I was talking about, we find out later on that Hank Henshaw actually died, and the man that's Hank Henshaw at this point is actually the Martian Manhunter transformed into Hank Henshaw. So again, while I have problems with Hank Henshaw being black, this guy playing Martian Manhunter is doing a fantastic job. I love what they're doing with the Martian Manhunter on the show. It's a great touch to it. So again, I'm kind of tempered with, they turned him to a black guy to, wow, he's doing a really good job as Martian Manhunter. So unfortunately, and there's some problems with that, just the fact that the Martian Manhunter is CGI, and due to budget restraints, you don't see him as much as the Martian Manhunter is I would like. Another qualm I've got with the show is in Supergirl herself. The young lady portraying her, she's doing a fantastic job, and that's part of the reason I can overlook my qualm. But in the comics, she's a blonde. In the show, she's more of a strawberry blonde. Depends how the sun hits. Sometimes it's blonde, sometimes more red. Honestly, and this is one of the ones it's hard for me to overlook. I can a little bit because she does such a good job at it. Whereas I'm able to overlook with Barry Allen over in The Flash, it's harder for me here for some reason. I don't know why. Again, Melissa Benoist, the gal that plays Supergirl, is doing a magnificent job. Don't get me wrong, I think she's magnificent. So I'm able to overlook her for the most part. Also, another qualm I've got is I've always heard it and I've always pronounced it Kara. On the show, they pronounce it Kara, which kind of every time I hear someone call her Kara, it just kind of strikes a nerve in the back of my brain. No, it's Kara. But what do I know? Another qualm I've got on the show is that on the show they have another holdover from Superman, Jimmy Olsen. Except for instead of a young photographer trying to make a place in the world who's a white guy, yes, another race change. He's an older, more experienced black guy, still a photographer, if you will, but he's more confident. And I heard people say, well, it's an older, more experienced Jimmy. It's still, for one part, it's the race change. Call me what you will, that bothers me. For another, the fact that he calls himself James Olsen. Well, I'm not Jamie, I'm an adult and I'm James. That bothers me. Jimmy Olsen is Jimmy Olsen, for God's sake. If you want to use Jimmy Olsen, use Jimmy Olsen. Speaking of using Jimmy Olsen, Kara's other friend on the show, and yes, darn, I'm going to call her Kara instead of Kara, because that's the way I always pronounced it. Her other friend on here, his name's Win, who we find out later on is actually Winslow Schlott Jr. He's Toyman's son, which I think is a nice touch. I wouldn't have minded so much. I think this guy that plays Win should have played Jimmy Olsen, because even though he's not quite the redhead, he comes across much more as a Jimmy Olsen character to me. But I think he's doing a fine job as Win, a.k.a. the Toy Man's son, but I think I would have liked to see him better as Jimmy Olsen. The whole James Olsen thing just bothers me. But again, having said all those gripes, overall I'm enjoying the show. Nice little touch on here. The fact that Kara's step-parents, the Danvers, her mom is being played by Helen Slater, who was Supergirl back in the 80s on the movie. And her stepfather is Dean Cain, who was Superman back on the Adventures of Lois and Clark, back on the 90s version of the Superman TV show. So I think that's a nice touch. And now that I'm at this point, I forgot one thing I forgot to mention back on The Flash I was going to get to. And I apologize. Let me backtrack just a minute to The Flash. I think I forgot to mention this. His dad on The Flash, Henry Allen, also Jay Garrick from Earth 2, is played by John Wesley Shipp, who played the Flash in the 90s Flash show. So I thought that was a nice touch that they got the Flash from the 90s Flash TV show to play the current Flash's dad and also the Golden Age Flash. So I thought that was a very nice touch. CW, magnificent. A little more praise for the Flash before we move on. But wonderful job. Also on the Flash, I forgot to say, I go back and edit, but I'm not done. I'm just going to say it right here. They've also had Amanda Pays, who played Tina McGee on the 90s Flash TV show, who was in the comics at the time frame. She's appeared in the current Flash as Tina McGee. A great choice. I love it. Thank you, CW. You guys are doing a fantastic job. But back to Supergirl. Like I say, I talked about her parents, her foster parents on here. I think that was a nice touch. But I think that's all I got to say about Supergirl for right now. Again, it was on CBS. It was canceled from CBS. And apparently CW's picked it up. And this next season is going to be a part of CW's lineup, which I think works perfect. We'll see how they incorporate it. Moving on from Supergirl, we go to the next show on my list, which is Legends Tomorrow. In theory, this show should be on the top of my list. Why? 3 reasons I'm going to tell you right now. 1, it involves Rip Hunter, who I enjoy, who is in the comic, he goes as a time master. It involves time travel. I'm a big fan of time travel. So that should be one reason it should be on the top of my list. The second reason is it has the previously mentioned Firestorm from the Flash I mentioned earlier. I talked about earlier that Ronnie dies trying to close his portal to begin season 2. During season 2 of The Flash, they bring in a new person to take over the Flash. Take over Firestorm, because we find out that the Matrix is very having issues without Ronnie there to help maintain it. Professor's dying. So there's a guy named Jefferson Jackson, who calls himself Jax. Young black kid, become part of the Matrix. I like it, but I've got issues with it. Again, if they were going to use another character, I wish they would have used Jason Rush, who was Firestorm in the comic. In The Flash, they had Jason Rush show up just for like an episode or 2 early on when they were trying to find out, about Martin Stein and all this. And then never heard from him again. Instead, they brought this young kid in named Jefferson Jax. In the comics, early on, Ronnie Raymond had one of his best friends in school was this young black kid named Jefferson, or Jackson. They refer to him as different names throughout. So we're thinking maybe they supposed to be Jefferson Jackson. We're not quite sure. I don't think we ever got discovered. But so I thought that was a nice touch. Also, Jefferson Jackson, a.k.a. Jax on the show, his personality is much more aligned with the Ronnie Raymond from the comics. He's a young football player, not quite as bright, more of a hothead, who works against the professors, even-handed, and intelligent. So the dynamic between the two is very much like the original Firestorm comic. I really love that. I just wish it had been Jason Rush instead of Jax. Minor qualm there. And I had spoilers and warnings. I haven't seen the entire season yet. I'm like 2 episodes away from finishing the season. I hear that they finally show some hint of transmutation power, but I haven't seen it yet, so we'll see. Actually, I guess I didn't see. My son called me. He's like, "Yeah, Dad, come here." Because he was watching these in his room. He's like, "Come here, watch this, Dad." I'm like, "Spoilers, I haven't seen it yet." He said, "You got to watch this, Dad." So they played like a minute of it, and we see him try. I forget what it was now. But I think it was a gun. He transforms it from a gun to air, so I forget now. Or salt or dust or something. I forget exactly, but he uses the transmutation powers briefly. So hopefully they'll explore more of that. And that can make the show come up a little bit. And so that's the second reason it should be higher. It's got Firestorm. The third reason it should be higher on my list is it has my other favorite character. I've got two favorite characters. If you listen to my podcast, you'll know it's Firestorm and the Atom. They have the Atom on here. Who first showed up over on the Arrow, which I'll get to in a little bit. Again, this should make it my favorite show of all time. Time travel, Firestorm, and the Atom. Where could they go wrong? Well, we're getting there. The Atom in here is played by Brandon Roth, who played Superman over in Superman Returns. Movie wasn't that great. Brandon did a decent job. He's doing a good job as Ray Palmer with what they're giving him. The problem is that originally this character is supposed to be the Blue Beetle, from what I've heard. DC Comics said, no, we're going to do something different with the Blue Beetle. You can't use him. So they turned him into the Atom. In the comics, the Atoms I've talked about before, and I'm going to talk about later on. The Atom, Ray Palmer finds this piece of white dwarf star. He uses it to shrink himself down. He makes a costume out of spandex or whatever. He embeds the material into the costume, and he allows himself to shrink down with a belt that he creates out of it. So he can grow smaller. For a brief time in the 90s, he was able to grow bigger. We'll get that another time. But he can shrink down to atomic size. And that's why he calls himself the Atom. In the show, and again, in the comics, Ray was more of a... I forget, he wasn't a general scientist. I forget now. I think he was like a physicist or something like that. In the show, he's just an all-around intelligent scientist. He creates this suit, ATOM. They love their acronyms. Firestorm's an acronym also. Over on Flash and Legend Tomorrow. But he creates a suit, an ATOM suit, called the Atom suit, which allows him to shrink. Eventually, it allows him to shrink down. At first, when he first showed up over in Arrow, he was just able to basically just rip off of Iron Man. You fly around, shoot beams, things like that. Call me unimpressed. Near the end of Arrow season 3, I think it was, there was an explosion. We thought he was dead. Couldn't find out he'd actually got miniaturized. And now he can shrink down, but he still flies around, shoots energy beams. It's like Iron Man crossed over with Ant-Man. But having Firestorm, the Atom, and time travel, this should be my most favorite series of all. But unfortunately, as you can hear, it's down my list a little bit. Between the problems between Firestorm and the Atom, Rip Hunter is played by, I forget his real name now, but he played Rory on Doctor Who. Again, it's part of the whole, not necessarily race, but the whole change to the characters. In the comics, Rip Hunter, I've always seen him as an American. Here he's played by I don't know, what is he, British or whatever. So and the change to that kind of throws me off a little bit. And the writing's not as top-notch as I'd like to be. It's not bad. It's basically, again, I've not finished watching the season yet, but the first season has Rip Hunter recruited a bunch of no-name heroes to help him stop Vandal Savage from killing his family, basically. Don't get me wrong, I'm enjoying the show overall. It's just that there are some minor corrections, if you will, it'd be a whole lot higher on my list. I do like the show. Rip Hunter comes from Vanishing Point, which is from the comics. His ship is called the Wave Rider. In the comics, there was one of the characters called Wave Rider that traveled through time. So, overall, like I said, I'm enjoying the show. But, like I say, it's around the middle of my list for a reason. Moving on from Legends Tomorrow, moving over to Fox, we have Gotham. Gotham, if you don't know, tells the story of, well, basically young Bruce Wayne. The story, from what I heard, originally the series was supposed to be basically a procedural show based in Gotham with Gordon and what have you dealing with the crazies. But too many Batman fanboys and what needs to have Batman in it. So it's, from what I understand, it's more from what it originally was to what it is now. And it's not a bad show. I'm enjoying it overall. At the end of the first season, it was extended from like 13 episodes to a full 20, 21, whatever. The last half of the season wasn't as good, but overall I'm enjoying the show. Again, they're taking a lot of the Batman villains and bringing them a lot sooner than they should be, because Batman is still young Bruce Wayne in this. And the story is still telling the story of Gordon rising the police force. Like I say, I'm watching, I'm enjoying it overall. But it's another show that it could be a little better. I probably would have liked it better if they would have stuck more to the Gotham Central. I believe it was kind of based around just the police force. But there's a lot of Bruce Wayne and Alfred. They have most of Batman's villain, Riddler, Penguin, Scarecrow showing up. They've got a young Catwoman, young Poison Ivy. They've recently introduced Azrael. So a lot of Bat characters are showing up early in here and making it more of a Batman show than a Gotham Central police show, in my opinion. But it's not a bad show, but I don't know. Moving on, we have Arrow back over on the CW network. Again, this is the Green Arrow. And they're finally, it's taken them 3, 4, 5 seasons, they're finally getting it a little more right. At first, it was, he didn't go by any real name. He was called the Hood, or the Archer, whatever. Eventually, they started calling him Arrow, and they finally adopted the name Green Arrow. And they're going more, embracing more of the comic roots, I think. The first season, it started off a lot of people didn't care for it. It was borderline for me. The acting was very overdramatic. I don't know. It seemed to pick up the second season as far as the acting goes and the writing. And the story switches back and forth between modern day and flashing back to what happened all over on the island originally. The second or third season, I think it was the second season, he got off the island. And to me, again, every season they switch back and forth during an episode between what's happening in real life and what's happened 5 years ago on the island, or 5 years ago when he was away. And at this point, I'm enjoying the show overall. I am a little tired of the flashbacks. Sometimes the flashbacks seems to take over the show. It takes a majority of the episode. And we find out in the show that, first it seems like he was on the island for the entire 5 years. And then we find out he was only on there for several months, and then he actually, was globetrotting, came back to Starling City, was an assassin for Amanda Waller. I don't know. I don't know. I'm just getting tired of the flashbacks at this point. In theory, they sounded good, but yeah, I'm just not liking the fact that instead of being on the island for 5 years, he was on there for maybe a year at the most, and then he went globetrotting. Worked for Amanda Waller. Oh, I love Amanda Waller. Not as big a fan as this version of the TV show, because as I've said over my Task Force X podcast, I prefer the John Ostinger's version of Amanda Waller, which is the heavier sets, shorter woman instead of the statuesque. Could be a model, but though they recently killed her off to make way for the Suicide Squad movie, which is upcoming. I'm excited to see that movie, but that's Arrow. That's, again, further down my list. Moving down further, we then run into Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. is a Marvel show. It's on ABC, and it's basically, it spins out of Avengers. In the Avengers movie, Coulson, one of the agents, again, spoilers for a movie from a couple years ago, Coulson dies, and then he shows back up in this show, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. We find out that there was a Tahiti program which brought him back to life using alien DNA and stuff. The Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. TV show, it's not bad. It's so far, that one, I've still like 7, 8 episodes on my DVR to watch the last half of the second season. or third season, wherever it's at. I am enjoying it for what it is. Part of my, and I will say this as a disclaimer or whatever, I am more of a DC fanboy, so that could be part of my issue with it. They've introduced Mockingbird, who I really like. The actress playing her is not doing a bad job. She's an agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. in here. I wish they would give her the Mockingbird costume, but they give her a standard agent S.H.I.E.L.D. costume or suit or whatever. They do have some of the villains, Absorbing Man. The second season's focusing heavily on the Inhumans. Another disclaimer, I'm not a big Inhumans fan. They're okay, but I'm not a big fan of them. So that may be another reason why this show's further down my list, because it's dealing with a subset of characters that I'm not a huge fan of. So, and finally, to wrap up this little section, there's Agent Carter. I still have yet to watch the second season. I've got it on my DVR. Just waiting to find time to watch it with my son. I enjoyed the first season. And Agent Carter tells a story about Agent Peggy Carter, who took place during the first Captain America movie. Again, it's a nice little drama, spy action movie or TV series with a female-centric character as the primary focus, the protagonist. I'm sorry. Again, it's not a bad show. I haven't watched the second season yet, time-wise, but I plan on watching it. Again, it's got solid writing. Haley Atwell does a good job as Agent Carter. Again, DC guy here. I like Marvel, but not a huge S.H.I.E.L.D. fan. It's okay for what it is, so Agent Carter falls in the same boat. It's not bad. And then we move on. Those are the shows I watched on a regular basis. Moving quickly on to a couple of new shows. Well, I'm not saying new shows. There's Lucifer over on NBC. I've only watched the first episode of that one. I've got the rest of them on the DVR to watch. That's a DC comic, Vertigo. It's basically the story of Satan, Lucifer Morningstar, and he's out on Earth, bored, taking a vacation. He's in Los Angeles. In the show, he's helping out the cops. It's not a bad show what I've seen so far. Again, it's just a matter of time, and I'm not quite sure how appropriate Lucifer is for a family viewing, so I try not to watch it when the kids are around. So far, the first episode doesn't seem to be a great show for family. I mean, he's talking about having sex with this one therapist and what have you, so I try to watch that when the kid's not around, especially your daughter. So that's one reason why I'm behind on that. So I'm liking what I'm seeing so far. I read a few issues of the old Lucifer Vertigo comic. Wasn't a bad story, so it's just a matter of finding time to watch it. And then there's Preacher. Preacher is another Vertigo DC comic. Preacher, the comic book, I loved it. It was by Garth Ennis. It tells a story about this preacher from Texas who gets hit with this cosmic power. We find out that this cosmic power is actually there's an angel and a demon that fell in love, made whoopee, had a child called, they called him, I forget the name, Genesis, I believe it was. And it was some sort of creature. They locked it up in heaven. It escaped. It came down to Earth, and it embodied this, imbued whatever, inhabited this preacher's body, and it gave him the power to, the voice of God, if you will. Whatever he said, people had to do. And the comic follows Jesse Custer, and he meets up with an ex-girlfriend who's an assassin, and this Irish vampire named Cassidy. And basically, they're looking through America, looking for God, who's taking a vacation from heaven, and they're looking for God to make him basically go back to heaven and take care of business like he should. They want a few words of God, kick him in the butt, make him, take responsibility. So far, I've watched the first episode of Preacher. It's a new series on AMC. I'm going to say I'm liking it so far. They've taken a few liberties that I got some issues with a little bit. For one, and I kind of see why they do it, but it doesn't mean I have to like it. One issue, it bothers me. I've mentioned it before. It's the whole race thing. They've changed Lily. They changed his girlfriend, Tulip. Sorry, that's what it was. They changed his girlfriend Tulip from a blonde white girl into this black lady, who actually was on Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. for a little while as a bad guy. But anyways, they changed Tulip into a black girl, a black lady, black woman, whatever you want to call her. Again, the whole race change bothers me. I don't like when they change the character's race. Especially in this where Jesse comes from a backwoods, hillbilly family who's very redneck and racist. And so that's going to change the dynamic of the show for me. Also, it does. I don't know if they're going to be traveling America, because in the show he ends up meeting the sheriff from Texas called Hugo Root, and his son. I forget his son's name now, but he ends up going by the name Marseface. He tries to kill himself like Kurt Cobain did, puts a gun in his mouth. He messes up, and instead of killing himself, he deforms himself, and it makes his face pucker up around his mouth. And when when Jesse and Cassidy see him, Cassidy makes a comment that the kid's face looks like an arse. And eventually the kid starts calling himself Arseface. In the comic, they meet him after a little while. In the show, Jesse's already friends with, or knows Sheriff Root, sort of friends with Arseface. So instead of him traveling the world and meeting these people, or the country, meeting these people, a lot of these people are starting out in the same town he's in. So overall, I like the first episode. It's a little slow. They dragged out his origin a bit more. My wife thought it was really slow. She didn't want to see the second episode to see how it is, but in the comic, he gets the power right away. In the show, it drags out and it shows you a little about Jesse before he became preacher. I'm saying preacher in quotes, before he got his powers and the story started proper. I don't have much to say about it. I'm not quite sure where it falls on my list. It's down here at the bottom just because it's a new show. And I haven't much like Lucifer, I haven't watched enough yet to really judge it fairly. And the final show I'm going to mention is Jessica Jones. It's another Netflix show based on a Marvel comic. I'm not a huge Marvel guy, so I'm not a huge fan of Jessica Jones. I know she was married to Luke Cage. They had a kid. She's got some sort of powers, I believe. She's got a detective agency. Again, I haven't had time to watch it. Again, much like Daredevil, it's not one for the kids, and it's hard to find time to watch it when my son, who's 22, can watch it with me, and my younger daughter's not in the room. So I definitely want to see it, but it's just a matter of timing. But I'm going to wrap that up there with the TV shows for this season. I'm sure I'll be back next season to talk about more. But let me know what you guys think. Do you guys watch these shows? Do you like them? Am I crazy? Am I right on? Let me know what you guys think. But for now, we're going to wrap that up right there. And my original intention, I was going to do an episode of What's in Head's Long Box, and I was going to start doing my Adam coverage. But I'm going to hold off till next episode, just for time-wise. We're just over 2 hours right now. And I don't have a lot of time right now to work on this as much as I'd like to, so we're going to postpone the Adam coverage and start that probably next month. So let's go ahead and move over to the mailbag.
Mail time. Mail time. Mail time. Mail time. The mail's here.
Here's the mail, it never fails. It makes me want to wag my tail. When it comes, I want to wail.
You've got mail.
This time out on Head's mailbag. Well, I don't really have any emails or any comments. The only thing I really have is my Twitters. So let's go and do some Twitters. So these are everyone that's liked or commented or retweeted things on Twitter regarding Headcast. And a lot of it could be any of my shows, not necessarily Head Speaks, but my Headcast network in general. We have Professor Alan Middleton, Captain Marvel, Cash Flag, Chris Sheehanen, Cindy Womack, Coffee and Comics Blog, Comic Book Insurance, Comic Reflections, Dan aka Dinosaur Number 1, Dr. G Nerdologist, DNS and RNS, the Film and Water Podcast, the Fire and Water Network Podcast, Greg A, Hicks, over on the Waiting from Doom, who I worked with those guys on my Task Force X podcast not too long ago here. Jeffrey Brown, Joe Slab, Lily Russell, London Garcia, Pen and Ink Reviews, Pride Land, Rick G, Ryan Daly, who's one of my buddies over on the G.I. Joe Real American Headcast, Sinister Purposes, Siskoid, So Gallifrey, I'm assuming that's a Doctor Who fan. Doctor Who, love it. Anyways, Sin, The Hammer Strikes, that's my buddy Gene Hendricks. I've been on his show once or twice. Checker Talk, Two True Freaks, Warlord Worlds, Wednesday Comics, and Willie Yarborough. Anyways, that is all of the tweeters and tweets and tweaks for this month. Now let's go over to the Facebook. On Facebook, we have Pat Sampson. Again, these are people that likes or reposted our things. So Pat Sampson, Ryan Daly, The Secret Origins Podcast, the Fire and Water Podcast Network, and Anthony Gerardo, who's our buddy over at the DC Comics Facebook group. Good guy. And finally, once again, our buddy Gene Hendricks. Hey, Gene. Anyways, Gene Hendricks is over at the Hammer Strikes podcast I mentioned over on Twitter. But that looks like that's all of our Facebook comments. Again, there's been no emails, so nothing to read on there. Nothing on the blogs recently to comment on, so nothing on there. So I guess that's going to do it for this episode of Head Speaks. I hope you guys enjoyed this 2-year anniversary episode. Hopefully here for at least another 2 years. But anyways, go and let you guys think. Again, send me an email to head@headspeaks.com. You can find us again on Twitter, Facebook under Headspeaks, or the Headcast Networks. Send us, visit the blog or the website at head.headspeaks.com, or just go to headspeaks.com and you can go from there. But I'm looking forward to hearing from you guys. And I almost forgot an end song. Just because anything else pulled out, let's go ahead and just go to my phone real quick, and let's go pull something I enjoy. We're going to pull something from Weird Al Yankovic from his Bad Hair Day album. Let's go ahead and play I'm So Sick of You by Weird Al Yankovic. So the final song after the credits will be Weird Al's I'm So Sick of You. Stay tuned, check it out, know what you guys think of the show. Wait to hear from you. Until next month, I guess that's it. Remember, Head has spoken. Thank you for listening to another fantastic episode of Head Speaks. Hope you enjoyed it. If so, let me know. Drop me an email to head@headspeaks.com or visit our home at head.headspeaks.com. You can also visit and talk with me on Facebook and Google+, both under Head Speaks. You can also send an MP3 file with your thoughts and I can play that on the air. And you can also get more of me on my other podcasts. Be sure to listen to Task Force X, where monthly I look at John Ostrander's Suicide Squad and Paul Kuppenberg's Checkmate comics from the 80s and early 90s. Also, over on G.I. Joe, a Real American Headcast, my podcasting friends Ryan Daly and Kyle Benning, along with myself, are looking at all of the G.I. Joe, a Real American Hero comics, and related titles from Marvel and IDW. All of my headcasts are available on iTunes and Stitcher, along with the respective blogs and my main page at headspeaks.com. All comments, thoughts, and opinions expressed on Head Speaks are owned wholly by the speaker of said comments and do not express the opinions of Head Speaks, unless, of course, I'm the one making the comments. Head Speaks, Task Force X, and G.I. Joe, a Real American Headcast, are all part of the Headcast family. So, join us next month, another wonderful episode of Head Speaks. Until then, I'll see you in the funny pages. Good night.
You tell a joke and forget the punchline. Why you
disgust me. Your hair's a mess and your makeup's crusty. I don't know too many females who make a habit of biting the toenails. Oh, every time you call, you drive me up the wall. Honey, just the sight of you makes my flesh crawl. I'm sure we'd be happy together if only one little thing were true. Oh, baby, I am so sick of you. You drink the milk right from the garden. What are you in kindergarten? You're belching everywhere, fouling up the air. Then you use my razor to shave your back hair. You don't have an ounce of class. You're just one big pain in the neck. How much more can I take now? Give me a break now. You even snore when you're wide awake now. You tell all your friends we're the perfect couple. Well, maybe you should get a clue. 'Cause baby, I am so sick of you. Baby, you're so nauseating. I am so sick of you. And when you softly call my name, it's like I'm listening to a squeaky chalk sound. And when you look at me that special way, it's hard for me to keep my lunch down. And when you ask me what I'm thinking, honey, usually I'm thinking how I'd really like to tie your head completely up in duct tape so I wouldn't have to listen to you asking me those stupid questions over and over again. Well, that disgusting noise you make when you laugh gives me a throbbing migraine. I just can't stand you. Until you came along, I never dated anyone that's low on the food chain. Can't stand you. I just can't stand you. You got a human body odor. You got the hair of a boxing promoter. Yeah, your teeth are all yellow. Your blood's made of jello. You wake up in a puddle drooling on your pillow.